From the creator of Walking with Dinosaurs and Primeval comes NBC's Surviving Earth, a brand new paleo doc focusing on the extinctions both before and after and how that influenced life on our planet. It gives us a glimpse into the lives of so many extinct animals, and new episodes premiere on Thursdays. But before you dive into the series, I had the wonderful opportunity of chatting with the show's creator, Tim Haines. Yes, that Tim Haines, the one who created Walking with Dinosaurs. I had lots of questions and he had even more answers, so let's dive right into this DinoFax interview. Well, first of all, thank you so much for being here in the first place. I can't tell you how much I am a fan of your work and just stuff that you've done over your long and historied career at this point.
Thank you. A pleasure to be here.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. And we'll start off with something simple. It's one of my favorite questions that I made. There's a myriad of animals in the show, creatures big and small, but what's your favorite creature? And maybe a little tidbit about the creature in the show.
It's difficult. There are a lot. I like them all, really. You're right. There are lots people haven't heard of. In the first show, there's a particular favorite is Elf, which is spelt E-L-P-H rather than E-L-F.
I love that.
And he's just a little survivor, basically, while all the huge creatures around him die out. His descendants carry on, and he burrows, which helps him survive the heat. And he's really a survivor, yeah.
I love to hear that. I mean, I think that's such a cool one to pick because a lot of folks might pick, the biggest or the scariest thing they see. But personally, I love the little guys, the underdogs.
They tend to be the ones that survive. It tends to be bigger ones go quicker in the case of extinctions.
That is something I've actually noticed a lot when it comes to like animal extinctions. It's not necessarily the most advanced creatures that survive into the next era and stuff. It are the things that can adapt the most easily to change.
Yes, it depends a little on what the mechanism is, but because sometimes it hits a particular group or particular environment. But certainly in one or two of these big extinctions, it's the generalists who survive, not the specialists. And the bigger you are, the more of a specialist you are. And you're right at the top of a huge food web. And if that collapses, you don't stand a chance.
It makes sense to me. And I think that's a really cool pick for your favorite animal in the series. If folks don't know, Elf is an amazing creature. Definitely one I'll have to make a video about in the future. When it comes to the show, we all know production can have its difficulties. What was your biggest challenge in bringing these animals and stories to life? And was there a particular animal and ecosystem that was difficult to portray?
Well, as you know, I made a show ages ago called Walking with Dinosaurs. It's it was a bit similar to that. We were coming up with natural history stories, but this time we had to talk to a lot of paleoclimatologists because it was about the Earth as well. So it wasn't just how T-Rex was; it's what was happening on that Earth at that time, on the Earth at that time. Probably the most difficult place to recreate would be the Carboniferous coal forests. So these are ancient forests, long extinct, where there were huge horsetails, trees we don't have today, vegetation you wouldn't recognize, and so quite often people go and film, or we have filmed in the past, in the Everglades to sort of try and pretend that's a Carboniferous forest, but it doesn't look the same. And so we built it all. We built it with, first of all, as a set, and then extended that with Unreal type of CGI package. And I think it looked great. We managed to recreate the Carboniferous coal forests.
That is amazing. And I mean, I can imagine just the difficulties that would take over for you in terms of just making such a big, broad set, in a sense. And I can imagine that technology has come such a long way from that time. I actually have a question about that as well. The CGI looks excellent in the series, and the creatures look absolutely beautiful, and the settings are just stunning. How difficult was it to blend the CGI with the real-world landscapes you filmed in, and did it influence the design of the animals or the story you were trying to tell?
Well, we knew what stories we wanted to tell and what animals, and then we looked for places where we could shoot it.
Mm.
It's I really like it. It's not hyper real. This is photoreal. So if you look at computer games, they're all the backgrounds and the animals are all digital, whereas this is photoreal, where you have to put a digital animal into a real environment. And there's a particular stage which is important called compositing at the end, where you've got a lovely creature, you've had his design, you've made a model of him, and he moves beautifully and runs around. But actually making him looking like he's in the picture involves a lot of work and many, many layers of dust and water and leaves and these sort of things to just make him look like he sits into that place. It's a bit easier when it's sunny because there's heavy shadows which help a little bit. No, the guys at Milk who were doing this for me, they know how to do that, and I just assumed every time they'd get it right. So no, I didn't let it affect my decisions.
Well, fair enough. And I mean, they did absolutely beautiful work on the series from what I've seen so far, because I have watched the first episode for myself so far. Um, that brings me to another topic. There are a lot of extinction events, both major and minor, strewn across all of Earth's history. Were there any that you were required to cut? And if so, what made you choose which ones to cut and which ones to keep?
It's a good point. I mean, everyone talks about the big five normally, and we
Yeah.
did do four of them, but we dropped one of them because as you say, they're good. There are over 20 that are significant. And what I was looking for is a different story every time. I didn't want to tell the same story. So actually the story of vast volcanic activity causing a surge in CO2, which is program one, the Permian extinction, is very similar to the Triassic-Jurassic extinction. So I didn't want to do both of those. And if you look at the others, they all have a slightly different mechanism going on. It could be the stagnation of the sea, it could be falling sea levels, it could be an asteroid, it could be a forest collapsing, or indeed the mixing of species on different continents. So the choice of the 8 all had to be telling us something different about life's relationship with Earth. And that's the principle of the show.
I love that. And that really goes to kind of help people get a broader sense of extinction as a whole, because to a lot of folks, I feel that that's a bit abstract, a bit of an abstract concept. Do you think that this show will help folks get a better grasp on extinction as a whole?
Yes, I hope so. I mean, the first thing is that we didn't want the show to ever feel abstract and irrelevant, because I think sometimes people look at dinosaur shows and think, what's that got to do with us? So it's very important that all the shows tell a story, and then right at the end we say, so this is why we're worried about this or that to do with our present situation. As for sort of feeling irrelevant, too abstract, we basically use stories. We want people to emotionally connect with the creatures, and then the creature takes you through the story. So you are following its life. You enjoy the story. There's highs and lows. There's jeopardy. There's all these sort of things. But essentially, it's a big metaphor for what we're trying to tell you about the relationship between Earth and life. And that can be summarized as Earth is a very difficult planet to live on because it changes so much all the time. It isn't dead and the same from 1 million years to another million years. It's completely different. It gets hotter, it gets colder. And so life has evolved to cope with that. So life, the very principle of life is it adapts. And that's why it survived so long. And in fact, got more and more diverse. Every time it gets hit on the head, it comes back stronger. And so you go right back to our first show, when basically life had boomed, it was all beautiful and different, but it mostly existed in the shallow seas. And the moment they were affected, life was in dire straits. But soon after that, it came onto land, and then it started to spread around and get more and more ecosystems. So actually, the severity of extinction events has got less and less over time because life just is so strong.
I think that's actually a really good answer, and it kind of leads into my next question, which you already sort of answered, actually, because there are undoubtedly echoes, mirrors of the past and present when it comes to extinction events. With so many environmental crises going on today, was it important to you that you showed both the connection to present and past in this sense?
Yes, I think that old saying, to know your future, you've got to know learn your past or whatever. Um, I think if people are worried about CO2 rising at the moment and the consequences of it, you can look into the past and see what happened before. And you do get big extinction events driven by CO2 rising, but it is phenomenal amounts of CO2. I mean, so you relate it to today, and we started off at a very low CO2 level, and now it's jumped right up. You know, we can see what
Yeah.
happens when things get too hot, but equally you can see CO2 is actually the stuff of life too. So it's a complicated picture, and the only way you can really explain it to people is to show them, is to let them see what happened, and then they can draw their own conclusions about how we're faring at the moment.
Wonderful. Yeah. And I mean, I think that that's really important for folks today is to understand how all these things affected us and led up to the point we're at now. And I think it's awesome to convey that through a docuseries of sorts. Um,
Yeah,
so
I think the thing to learn is that death was extremely important in life, the development of life. If nothing had died or been driven into extinction, we wouldn't be here. There wouldn't be such diversity. It would just still be a bunch of worms in the sea, probably. But by pushing life to adapt all the time, it's developed a system for variety.
yeah, it's an odd sort of natural balancing act, and I think it's a very compelling one.
Mm.
Um, so I know you've probably heard to death about Walking with Dinosaurs at this point, but it's one of the most famous paleo docs you've made before. From 1999 to now, a lot of things have changed, including you, with holding a ton more experience since then. From your perspective, how does it compare to make Surviving Earth now, almost 30 years later, versus making Walking with Dinosaurs in the 90s?
Well, I think, as you say, a lot has changed in the technology producing these animals, in the science of what we know about these animals, and the ambition and budgets really are different than they were back then. But making it back then, I was very fortunate to team up with a wonderful head of CGI at Framestore called Mike Mill, and we went on a voyage together. We didn't know what we were doing. Well, I didn't realize it was such a terrible ask of him, but I think he knew a lot more about it than me. But I think that in approaching this one, we could afford to look at a more complex structure, because in Walking with Dinosaurs, we were just trying to make natural history programs about dinosaurs. That was the end goal, and if we succeeded in doing that, brilliant. In this one, we're telling a complex story. We're using the natural history grammar, and we're using the animals to illustrate that sort of balance between Earth and life. And so it was an extra complexity I wouldn't have been able to do before.
I love to hear that because I know to you it must be like the technology itself has evolved rather than just the animals. And that, along with the science, I can imagine just kind of helps push it forward, if that makes sense. And oh, keep going. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that if you imagine going back to 1999, there was still some disagreement about whether dinosaurs had feathers at all. We were very relieved about that because the technology at the time didn't do very good feathers. So it was nice so we could just stick a few spikes on a theropod and get away with it. Now, of course, the technology to make feathers and fur and pico fibers and all this sort of stuff is very much more advanced. And so we can respond to all the changes that came about in science's attitude towards dinosaurs.
And I'm sure that kind of did it almost make you feel relieved in a sense that the technology is caught up now. So now that you're making the show, all these feathered creatures will actually look in your head how you wanted them to look, rather than how CGI was restrained in the 90s.
I don't think anyone was certain in the 90s because China had only just opened up, and all these wonderful fossils with showing the feathers on these dinosaurs were only just becoming public. So I think I wouldn't have been extremely keen to cover everything in feathers. Literally about 5 years later, I thought, ooh, we really should be covering things in feathers. And so we did this time, obviously.
For sure, for sure. And honestly, I really like that. And it kind of helps with the narratives of the story as well, I'm sure. Like back then, I'm sure the scaliness might have helped for whatever science was more prevalent at the time. And nowadays with feathers, I'm sure that kind of helps because feathers can be used as a storytelling piece as well, right? For mating or other display purposes and whatnot. And I'm sure that kind of helps with the narrative itself, I would assume.
Yes, I mean they are more spectacular than we imagined before. I mean, a time when everything was grey or green or
Yep.
brown. That's what a dinosaur had to be. And it was almost like the scientists were doing that because they wanted to be cautious. It wasn't because there's any evidence that they were those colours at all, but they didn't feel brave enough to colour them up like peacocks. Now, very much more so, they know and even have evidence of colour in these dinosaurs, and knowing they're more closely related to birds, who are an extremely colourful group of animals, you begin to think, yeah, it's more likely. And not only that, but they were covered in frills and bits that stuck out. And you think, well, what are these for? Well, probably display. So, yes, I think dinosaurs have become, for good scientific reasons, much more colourful than they were 30 years ago.
I love that. And with that, so the narrative within the episodes, each individual episode, seeing from the first one so far, are all compelling. So were there any direct inspirations that influenced the story of each episode directly?
Well, yes. I mean, we obviously this is all comparative behavior. We're using living animals and trying to draw conclusions from that, but also looking for fossils that give us some evidence, especially trace fossils and things. So in the first one, you saw the Gorgonopsids were altitudinally migrating. In other words, they were moving up the mountain to try and stay cool, which we do know animals are doing in Africa. So it also was a wonderful way of tying their personal story with the temperature rising. But for the fossil evidence, ELF belong to a group where they know they burrowed. And there's evidence of those burrows in the Karoo Basin in South Africa. So I think we're always looking for good evidence. We usually base a program in a very rich fossil bed because we want as much information as possible, so that we can then build the stories around as many facts as there are available. Sometimes we have to join those up, and obviously we speculate about animal groupings. There's a family. Do we know Gorgonopsids lived in a family? We know that they were social, but we don't know much, or related creatures were social. We don't know much more about that. So it was speculation that it was a male leading some females. But I think people kind of know that now, and they know that the promise we have to the audience is that we will do the very best science we can and not just make something up for the sake of it.
I really appreciate that answer because it kind of does lead into another question, because I've seen this online in a few different spots. When it comes to those speculative behaviors, there will always be people who challenge and argue against things represented in the show for quote unquote lack of evidence, even though there might be some kind of actual evidence that they're not aware of. For example, the Inostrancevia, as you were saying, for being portrayed as like a lion-like pride or a group of some kind. What made you choose those speculative behaviors for the animals, and how do you balance that with the scientific accuracy to kind of dissuade these naysayers?
Well, I mean, the simple answer to that is it either exists or it doesn't. We either do it, in which case you've got to speculate, or you don't do it. You can reconstruct an animal and put it on the screen, but the moment it takes a step forward, you start asking questions. Did its feet move that way? Does its head move that way? Paleontologists have been doing this for years, normally with stills and paintings, and then gradually they got more ambitious with animatronics, and then CGI came along, and most paleontologists have their favorite paleo artists they work with, and they know they can't communicate their subject unless someone, an artist, sits down and interprets what they're saying. You can look at a skeleton, but unless you're an expert, that tells you nothing. So what has happened is that artists have started to fill in the gaps. And so the answer to why does it do this or that, if we have some evidence, we will follow that. If we don't, we'll come up with a reasonable solution. And that's what we do in the show. Now you can say, no, I disagree. I think it should be a female-led society. And you go, okay, that we could have done that, but we decided to do male. But there's no evidence that it was female either.
Certainly, certainly. And honestly, I think that's a great way to kind of put it to folks, because I have seen a lot of folks who just seem to just jump on a bandwagon of sorts and try to say everything these days is scientifically inaccurate compared to things from the 2000s or the 90s, like Walking with Dinosaurs. And I think that a lot of folks are curious on like the fact of like, why do you think there's so much like misinformation in this way that people automatically assume that certain speculative behaviors might be inaccurate?
Well, the word speculative is what it is. It's speculative behavior. Comparative biology and anatomy is how paleontologists work. There is a lot of art in what paleontology does as well as science. But over the years, over the 160 odd years, no, 180 years, they've built on each other's knowledge and reconstructions, and we're pretty sure about a lot of the material that we speculate about because fossils turn up and give us evidence. They also give us surprises, and then everyone changes. You know, when the pterosaur footprints were found, suddenly everyone realized they didn't walk on two legs, they were on all fours, and everyone changed. So I had a very good example of this, which was when Walking with Dinosaurs first came out. Everyone said, whoa, 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 whoa. And then suddenly, how do they know all of this? And so a journalist went off to a museum in London and got the museum person to say, well, there was a creature that was urinating. They don't urinate. They're like birds. They don't urinate at all. It's all nonsense. Of course, 10 years later, someone proved that they urinated just like if you see an ostrich urinate, you see it urinate. They've even found fossils of sauropod urine splashes. So in the end, you know, we're doing our best, and we always make sure we've got the very the most expert scientist on each animal. So we talk to over 300 scientists. Scientists disagree with each other quite often, and therefore we have to pick one, and it's usually the one that's most well known for working on that creature or that time, and we go with that. In that first show, I would have loved to have covered my Gorgon with fur or give him whiskers, because they're very, very early mammals. But in the end, the professor we were working with said, well, I'm afraid it's just too early for the appearance of fur on these creatures, so no. So I was not allowed to give them whiskers and a bit of fur, even though a lot of illustration do. Sorry?
I said that would be adorable.
Yeah, well, sort of scrubby pig fur, probably not adorable.
All right, fair enough. And you know, we've been talking so much about Walking with Dinosaurs. How does Surviving Earth compare to, say, your creation of Primeval and working on that show?
Well, Primeval was a lot of fun being a drama. I didn't have to obey the rules quite so much. So we do actually have a Gorgonopsid in Primeval, and I deliberately gave him a set of 4 saber teeth, because I thought, I'm just going to cheat here because I can. So Primeval was fun like that. It was a fantasy and an entertainment. But, you know, when you're designing your monsters, it's always good to base it on something that existed, because you can see, like when you see dragons fly, you never believe it because it's got this great big heavy body and a couple of wings, and you think this doesn't work because it never existed. Yeah. Whereas you see a theropod run about and you go, well, I've never seen anything like that before, but it looks real. It looks like it could have lived. So yes, when it came to Surviving Earth, I think there were 2 things that are different. One, it's much more ambitious than Walking with Dinosaurs was, but it's more relevant. I mean, I'm trying to say to people, dinosaurs are not just dead creatures that have nothing to do with us. It's not a message. It's not as if you're pushing anything in particular. But when you look at it, I find it a very positive thing, because what it's saying is life is incredibly strong, and life, whatever the Earth does, will find a way through it all and thrive afterwards. That's what life does.
I love that answer. And I think it really shows just how much you care about this series and just this work as a whole. The series is all about extinction, how the creatures manage to survive or adapt to the changes. But how did you choose which creatures to focus on to tell your story? It sounded like you went with mostly the more populous ones from certain locales. But was there anything else that influenced those decisions?
Well, you start off with the extinction event, so there's only a certain set of creatures that were living at that time, so we have to be accurate that way. We then choose a very well-known fossil site from that period, because we have the most information about those creatures. And then within that set of creatures, yes, we probably follow the more charismatic ones, because you don't want to see a whole program about snails. But we had a few. We pop in one or two less charismatic ones that give a sense of an ecosystem, because in the end, we haven't got endless funds. We can only include 8, 9 different animals, so you can't show the complete breadth of what was living there. But you show variety, and it allows you to tell the story. And that was really how we came to choose the characters in each show.
I love that. And I think that that's a really cool way to choose off it. And, building off of that, after seeing the first episode, the storytelling is pretty compelling and rich compared to a lot of other shows. How did you balance and blend both the narrative you were trying to tell with the real science and facts about these animals and the extinctions?
Well, we're very familiar with natural history giving us some pretty compelling stories about prides of lions or African dogs. There have been some great ones. There's a lot of drama in life. I mean, it's mostly about surviving and reproducing, or catching prey or being prey. But within that, humans love to empathize with creatures, and seeing a little creature survive, or even a big creature survive, can be very, very moving. We never go as far as calling them names. It's never going to be, Eric or Cynthia. They are
Cynthia the Gorgonopsid.
Yes, Cynthia. She was called that. Yes, but we don't do that. But you identify the character and you follow their plight, and I think that's what we need to do. We don't need to go further than that.
Okay, I really think that that's a good way to kind of progress your narrative while not humanizing these animals too much, because of course at the end of the day they are animals, and while we do want to connect to them on an emotional level, I think it's important that we still keep that separation of like they're not people, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I'm not pretending their behavior is as complex as humans. It's not got revenge motives or
of course
those sort of drama elements. So it is quite tough to keep the people guessing and keep them sort of anticipating the story, because you can't lean into a 3-act play and an exciting incident and all that sort of stuff. But I think, as I say, they are facing massive extinction events, and they're in a terrible situation. And who doesn't sympathize with a creature put in that situation?
Good point. And survival is one of the biggest aspects of the show. Were there any events that you learned about that surprised you with animals' resilience or adaptations in the face of an apocalyptic event?
Yes, I suppose I have a slightly newfound respect, although I'm very familiar with it, but I'm researching it again, a newfound respect for life when the asteroid fell, because most of the events we talk about take place over thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years. And therefore, life has an ability to get used to it or willow out the survivors. In the case of the asteroid fall, literally overnight. I mean, people talk about humans being our effect on the Earth being in a very short timescale. Nothing compared to a great big asteroid landing one night or one day. And then after that, there was this 10 to 30 years of darkness. And when it goes dark, of course, all your primary producers, your grass and your trees and everything die. And the idea that life managed to get through all of that is astonishing, because it had no chance to practice. It wasn't as if they'd had lots of well, they have had asteroids falling before, but none seem to have had such a powerful effect as this, which is to switch the lights off. So I think in the end, what the show points out is it wasn't the asteroid, it was the darkness that killed most of life. And I think that none of the other asteroids had succeeded in putting so much rubbish into the atmosphere to turn the lights off. So I think that was very impressive, that when the skies cleared, life was ready to jump back. And obviously for mammals, that was great.
Certainly, yeah. And I mean, I'm sure a lot of folks find it almost surprising to a certain degree just how quickly life recovered and managed to start coming back. And of course, it took a long time for it to get to, pre-extinction event levels, but that's kind of the point of the show, correct?
Yeah, I mean, and it's a good example, as I mentioned, mammals, without the asteroid, mammals would not be in the position they are now. But not only that, but tropical rainforests started after the asteroid. So the richest environment we have on Earth at the moment was a consequence of that. So that's what I mean when I say, there's death in the middle of life. Without the asteroid, then you wouldn't have tropical rainforests full of mammals.
Okay. And actually, I think that's a great thing. I heard a quote one time, death begets life. It is a cycle itself.
Yeah.
And so science has grown at such an astonishing pace since Walking with Dinosaurs. We've learned so much since then. So how does the science in this series compare to other paleo-docs you've worked with or you haven't worked with that you've just learned about?
Well, I think anyone who's a big fan, and I'm sure you are, you've noticed there's been a real uptick in the amount of paleo-docs.
Yep.
I was desperately out there trying to sell. I was too late. I couldn't get to Apple in time. So yes, there's been some very good ones on Netflix and Apple. And it was partly driven by the fact that I think these channels can afford the CGI to make them look really good. And I think that NBC were... with ours, we have a slightly different message. Obviously, the other ones were just natural history of creatures. We're talking about extinction events, and I think that informs people a little bit more and is a bit more relevant. That was the principle behind that commission.
Okay, certainly. And the public love them to death, but they're not often a big fan of long words and all the scientific jargon that we use in paleontology. How did you keep them interested while still maintaining that accuracy?
I think I mentioned it before. I think unless the viewer emotionally connects with the story, then they're going to get bored. Unless you have a kind of an intellectual commitment to something, like a very tough documentary, very scientific documentary, you're not going to watch it, because we are looking to television to distract and entertain us. The point about this show is that it is emotionally affecting and it is entertaining, and you're not so aware that you're learning, because all the CGI, the imagery, the stories and everything package it in a way that it is easy to watch, and you're not so aware that you're being told about the level of coal burning in the Permian and all these things. We don't use many long words, but clearly we name the creatures.
Of
we
course.
don't shy away from that, and so I think that the end result is worked before for us, obviously just in a natural history sense, but I think it can work here because we're talking about our Earth and how life works on this planet, and I think that they'll hear things they haven't heard before because of that.
Among the paleontology community, you are a legend when it comes to dinosaur projects, from Walking with Dinosaurs to Primeval. Thank you. Well, sorry, no, I completely messed that up. But you are a legend amongst those. You are a legend when it comes to dinosaur projects, from Walking with Dinosaurs to Primeval. How does Surviving Earth compare to some of these other shows that have acclaimed so much popularity? How does it stand out and make its name known compared to them?
Sorry to repeat myself, but yes, it's not just a natural history program. It is about extinction and extinction events. And we all know we're meant to be living through an extinction event at the moment. But the past ones show us that life can cope with that. So the show has a very strong message that's relevant to today, but you're not beaten over the head by it. This is something that you absorb as you watch it. And if you manage to watch all 8, which I hope people will do, you really do by the end go, well, actually, today's not that bad. Life has seen a lot worse.
I mean, you're definitely right there. There could be more of an issue going on. Well, of course, we should still, work to protect our natural environments and ecosystems, but that doesn't mean it's as bad as the dinosaurs or in Australasia or other creatures had it.
No, I mean, if Yellowstone goes up, I think that we'll really realize how difficult life can be.
For sure. And finally, Tim, my last question that I have for you today, is there anything in particular you want to talk about concerning the show, the creatures, anything you feel that folks would want to know?
No, I think we've covered most things. I mean, it is the principle, the whole show is more relevant, and it is the principle that life and Earth has had a long, long relationship, and therefore they've learned to adapt to each other. And life can affect Earth. We're doing it at the moment, but Earth can certainly affect life. So the two are wrapped closely together, and it's a very successful relationship. It's been going for 2 billion years almost, and all it looks like is that it's getting more and more comfortable. Actually, life knows how to adapt should things go wrong. So I think it's a positive show. That certainly with the first creature that can actually look up to the skies and look around and go, we can see what's going on. We can do things about this. And therefore it would be sensible to do that. But I don't think we should sit there feeling completely hopeless in the face of inexorable disaster. I don't think that's what it is. I think that, this Earth will go on and life will go on.
Certainly. I think that you have proven yourself over the course of this conversation on why so many folks respect and love you as a creator of these kinds of shows. You have the compassion for the animals, you have the care for the accuracy, while you still care also about making sure folks are entertained and compelled with the story. I cannot thank you enough for creating the show, and I'm very excited to watch the rest of it personally. And I can't thank you enough for joining me here today and discussing the show with me.
My pleasure.
Well, it's been a fantastic time, and thank you so much once again. Any final words you'd like to leave the folks out there with?
Oh, watch on, enjoy.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much once again. Hey there, folks. Thank you so very much for watching. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your continued support. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure to leave a like, and if there's anyone you want me to interview next, leave a comment down below, and I'll see what I can do. A big thank you to Tim Haines and NBC for joining me today. It was an honor to interview someone who created so many of my favorite childhood shows. But until next time, folks, remember to be good people, drink plenty of water, and have a fantastic day.